actions that are sent and operate light node infrastructure with full node security or less? Are we centralizing fundamentally? Every change has to be scored this way. So this is a big item in the open source project that we've been discussing, and it's something that we care deeply about, to the extent that when we talk about founding institutions, some of those institutions embedded in academia and embedded in standards bodies will be focused on creating objective metrics, not just for Cardano, but for the industry as a whole. So we can, for the first time ever, be able to know where Cardano officially stacks up against Ethereum and Solana and EOS and all these other systems. We have crude metrics like Nakamoto coefficients, for example, but they don't accurately reflect the nuances of these protocols. And it's about time we had some rigor behind it. The good news is this is a problem that's very collaborative in nature, and it's something that everybody has an incentive to talk about. And frankly, we as consumers, we need to level up a little bit. We can't just demand raw performance at the cost of principles and philosophy. We have to demand performance while maintaining our principles and philosophy. And we can't just demand a system where we leave people behind. I shared Moxie Marlinspike's article for good reason, because a lot of Web3 is actually just Web2 and Web3 clothing, highly centralized upon with infrastructure that people like JP Morgan own. And the more centralized it is, the easier it's going to be for this space to become co-opted. We've already seen the politics of personal destruction enter this space. We've already seen all kinds of shenanigans with governments around the world doing things, both implicitly and explicitly. Now in China, I think you can have jail time for trading cryptocurrencies. And that's just one of hundreds of examples. So it's very important that we ask ourselves, what are we actually trying to accomplish? That brings me to my final point, which is the kind of a constitution or a Bill of Rights or some fundamental principles. They've always been implicit in why Cardano and in the Cardano community, and Bitcoin has them implicit in the code. And if one was asked, what are the principles and values of Bitcoin? And a lot of people would say things like the monetary policy, for example. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. Put their hand on the table. No monetary policy changes, ever. Ethereum does change its monetary policy with EIP 1559 and others, and more to come. And that's fine, but that's a philosophical difference between these two ecosystems. One of the least developed areas, in addition to metrics, is the idea of meta governance, constitutions, the idea that blockchains need some form of governing principles that are explicitly there and understood. Some of you know I invested $20 million to Carnegie Mellon University to set up a center for formal mathematics. One of the things that the center is trying to do, and it's somewhat analogous to where we're at as an ecosystem, is it's trying to capture mathematics as mathematicians understand it, which is built to communicate to other mathematicians, and make it machine understandable. So take things that were in LaTeX or handwritten, things that exist in presentation code, but not in code that a machine can have an opinion on, and get it constructively to a point where a machine could understand it. Now, this is one of the hardest things you can do, and it's the first time math has gone for a major rewrite in 120 years since David Hilbert. And the rest of the gang were running around like Gödel and Turing and so forth. Now, analogously, there's a question of how much should the ethics, the integrity, the soul, the intentions of the system be machine understandable? Because if they're machine understandable, you can then build protocols that can actually operate on the intent and embed them as kind of a regulator of the system for all smart contracts. This comes up a lot in the privacy space. People want confidentiality and privacy, but at the same time, they don't really like the consequences of confidentiality and privacy in certain areas. So while we would love to see dissidents in Russia who are protesting the war in Ukraine have a system that gives them the ability to freely associate and get funding and be able to express themselves and resist the government, at the same time, many people wouldn't like that same set of tools being used for child sex trafficking, or terrorist financing. You see, same technology. So governance of these systems is very important. And you can't just trust a government, because if you trust the United States, for example, the same backdoors, the same process will inevitably be used by Russia or Iran or another government, China. You see, so these are complicated things. And the level of machine understandability of the ethics of the system, the intent of the system, are very important. Cardano is right up there with all of the best-in-class smart contracting systems. As the expressivity of the system grows, and as we add sidechains, every person who has something becomes a subset of Cardano, which effectively means that Cardano will eventually have more capabilities, in my view, than any other cryptocurrency, because we can, like the Borg, just absorb their technology over time. When we have all of that, because we have all these capabilities, millions of people will come in and use this technology in different ways. Some ways good, some ways not so good. Many people ask me, where did the name Cardano come from? It was Girolamo Cardano. Now, I picked him for good reason, because he wasn't a good person, but he wasn't a bad person. He was a nuanced person of the Italian Renaissance. Brilliant mathematician. He was a doctor, also a complete scoundrel. And he invented pieces of probability theory for gambling. He was the Pope's private physician, but also excommunicated from the church. He was a very interesting fellow, and I felt that was an appropriate name for a cryptocurrency. Sometimes cryptocurrencies are bad. Sometimes cryptocurrencies are good. And in our love and rush to embrace this new technology, we must be intellectually honest and wise enough to acknowledge the times that they are bad. The point of regulating structures are to figure out how do you blunt that. And we don't need a government or a regulator to do that. We can use the very same things that make a blockchain a trusted custodian, things like smart contracts and so forth. So the meta point of this governance experiment, as we move into this complete open source project throughout this year and build all these institutions, is a deep conversation about the Bill of Rights of Cardano, the Constitution of Cardano, the fundamental things that are difficult or damn near impossible to change, and making sure that those are established well and they're machine understandable to the extent where Cardano itself can then enforce that as people attempt to change it and update it for the future. This is probably the most ambitious part and most dangerous part of the Cardano project. We go from writing papers in science to things like real hard engineering to unsolved problems that may never fully be solved. There is no government in the world people are universally happy with. There is no policy or person so beloved that it is considered beyond reproach. Humans like diversity, which is why we have many languages, many cultures, many religions, and it's not going to change anytime soon. So no matter what we end up converging to, some people won't be happy. But if we do a good job, at least those people will be heard and still have a voice and still have a say, and probably can still use the technology of Cardano for the things that they care about. That's the great challenge before us. So it's been a hell of a ride, and that's why it's so bittersweet. You know, everything changes, and you get to make sequels, but it's never quite the same as the original movie, and that's okay. And I know that we can get this done, though, because I got all of you. And there's a lot of really brilliant people in this community. We've built a relationship over the last 6 years. I'm never going to stop the AMAs. I'm never going to stop broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado, sometimes other places. Hell, I might even go to space one of these days. We got too many people that are in those circles for them not to sell me a ticket on one of those rockets. But despite all the shenanigans and the ups and downs and the craziness and just the daily grind, what makes this job so special and what makes everything so special is the fact that I really do get to work with the best people. And we're all on a mission together. We ultimately, at this company, want to improve the systems of the world for everyone everywhere. It's what we've always tried to set out to do. Come October, I'm going back to Bermuda. Many of you got on this boat either with the whiteboard video in 2017 or the TED Talk from 2014 that I did. That TED Talk in 2014, I made a lot of commitments and promises. I wrote a check that I didn't quite have the cash, the money to cash. I said, this technology is going to go change the developing world and bring economic identity to everybody. 8 years later, when we look back at all of this, it is really remarkable and amazing that it looks like we can actually cash that check now. The technology is evolving to the point where people in the developing world can live completely within the crypto ecosystem. Don't believe me? Look at El Salvador and the experiment they're running. An enormous progress has been made in Southeast Asia and in Africa. The third largest adopter of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is Nigeria in the world. That's just 8 years. It went from nothing to that. And it's going to be good to go back and show it. Like what Paul Halmos used to say, tell them what you're going to do it, and tell them what you did. And so in October, my hope is to be able to show you what we did and hopefully inspire the next generation to take it even further than we ever could.